Welcome, Magnus here, and in today's video we're talking about firmware updates and why the Canon R5, I think this is the last one, and this is the last hurrah for the R5, and no 30-minute time limit removal. We still got the 30-minute time limit, unfortunately. If you're new to my channel, definitely consider subscribing. I talk about cameras in terms for videos, so if you like that stuff, definitely consider subscribing, and welcome all new subscribers to my channel. Thank you very much. Now, I recorded myself updating the firmware on the Canon R5, recorded myself updating the firmware on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, and that camera came out years ago, and Blackmagic is still supporting it. We're talking before 2020. I think it came out like 2018. This is 6 years later, and they're still issuing firmware updates to that camera. Whereas the 5D Mark IV, which came out in 2016, stopped getting updated years ago. If you don't know, that's Canon's last 5D DSLR. You could say its spiritual replacement was the Canon R5. I do not count the EOS R. I think the Canon EOS R was Canon's way of experimenting with full-frame mirrorless before it jumped in with the R5. Now, the R5 itself has been out since July of 2020. Came out on my birthday in July 2020. So it's been 4 years. And that was 4 years after the 5D Mark IV came out. So 4 years after that was the R5. And now it's been 4 years since then. And everyone's talking about the R5 Mark II. So I think that right now, those last firmware updates were all you were going to get. So that 30-minute time limit, which I believe is more than just a firmware update. There's could be hardware tied to it, but I'm not absolutely sure. I thought I heard that once, which is why you won't get 30-minute time limit removed. Now, you could get around it with external recorders such as the Atomos Ninja V Plus, which I own. But as far as internally, no, you're still stuck with 30 minutes. And we were hoping for that to be in the firmware for a long time. Now, the firmware update on the Canon R5 does do a couple of things, minor adjustments, but why they would call it 2.0, I believe it's really because this is your prime firmware and your last firmware before the R5 Mark II comes out. So everything you're going to get for the most part is already on this firmware update, and that's all you're pretty much going to get. Now, Sony released a firmware update for their A7S3, which came out 4 years ago, around the same time the R5 came out. I believe Sony is prepping for an update. Now, the update on the Sony allows for different things, nothing too groundbreaking. I thought that one of the most interesting things on the Sony A7S3 is now it allows you to record in true 4K. It basically cinema 4K, which is 4096 by 2160 versus its 3140 by 2160. Now, I've heard those that just say if you use 16:9 screens or you're updating for YouTube, record in the standard 16:9 format anyway. I'm kind of one that disagrees with that because I believe that if that, and I'm not sure, I could be right or wrong, but if it's just using a little bit more of the sensor to record 4096 by 2160, it allows you to crop in a little bit more should you desire to do that, or slightly higher detail if you use the full 4096 by 2160 and then shrink it or downsize it for YouTube. And then, of course, you'll have little black bars in the top and bottom, but it's okay. It still looks great. So Blackmagic's update to me was the best update because Blackmagic's Pocket Cinema Camera update included several things, like you can actually preview your files and delete files, which you really couldn't do for the longest time on this Blackmagic camera. But also, one of the things that I'm excited about is that you could use it as a webcam. Now, I've used the Blackmagic camera as a webcam by using this HDMI out port, and I have an HDMI input on my computer, so I can just do it that way. But to have it work with the interface and just connect via USB-C, it actually, I tested it out right here. You can see the footage, and it looks really good. So from that standpoint, I think that interface works very well, and it allows me to free up that HDMI input so that I can have more cameras that I can use when recording without any extra cost, which is really nice, especially for live streams. If I want to show different angles and like switch on the fly, that works perfectly. But when it comes to that and these firmware updates, I believe there was a reason that they all came out, especially Canon and Sony, is because the R5 Mark II is going to be announced. and the Sony A7S IV will be announced probably shortly before or after then. That's what Sony did 4 years ago when the R5 was announced. R5 was great. It had 8K. It had all these features that everybody wanted. And then Sony comes in and they were like, we've got the Sony A7S III. We've got low light, 4K 120, great sharp video, amazing beast of a camera with unlimited recording rather than the 30-minute time limit. And all of these features that made people say, you know what? I'm going to go to Sony. Plus the codecs that they had to work with at the time, Sony was ahead of the game. Whereas the R5, it used the H.265 codec, which is a high quality but higher compressed format when you recorded 10-bit, which means it was a little bit harder to edit on standard computers. And then the 8K RAW was huge. And then you had the overheating issues with the 4K 120, 4K 60, and of course oversampled 4K 24 and 4K 30. So it's like all the modes that make the R5 next level were pretty much dumbed down by overheating when the camera was released. Right now, the R5 does not have that problem. The overheating is a thing of the past. I've recorded full events, full long events, in either 4K HQ or in 8K, and never even an overheating warning. So I'm super glad that that's been fixed. But here we are 4 years later. We're looking forward to what Sony's going to counter with when the R5 Mark II is announced, and what else does Blackmagic have down the scope? Because this firmware update on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera and the Blackmagic Cinema Camera line are pretty cool. But then they tend to always do that. But they timed it right when Sony and Canon actually released their firmware updates. But things are brewing, and it's about to get exciting. What do you guys think? When do you think all of this stuff is going to happen? I believe it's going to happen end of April, at least for the R5. But what about the Sony A7S Mark IV? Leave your comments down below. And as always, you can like, share, you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. And if you're sticking around here, little channel update. My channel has grown by thousands of subscribers. I want to thank all of the new subscribers. It's still growing as we speak. I'm actually kind of putting together the data of how my channel actually started to take off and what I did over the years to actually prime it for like a good response when it starts growing, so that I can make sure I serve you guys with what you're looking for and continue to do what I do and make it reasonable. But what was that secret sauce that led to the growth? I want to kind of document that. I think I have the data, and I'll let you guys know, of course, in future videos, but I'll leave it towards the end so that you guys don't have to stick around. But thank you. As always, you can make my day if you subscribe today. I'm saying it again. This is Magnus, and I'm out. See you guys later.